Cool. So, welcome back, folks. It's Friday. It's the end of the week. And we've learned a lot this week. We've been working with web servers. We've started working with databases. We're starting to get to the point where we can have a lot of our own really cool websites. So, what we're going to do today is expand upon what we learned earlier and really start to build applications that connect to the database and use them. One of the things that we're going to do is start that out using the command line, just because we've written more programs that do that using the command line, but we'll also see later how we connect all of the pieces together, but that will be more next week that we focus on that. So we're trying to sort of isolate all the pieces so you only have to think about so much at once before we graft it all together. So our opening exercise that I want you all to do, hopefully you've got MySQL already set up in your workbench. If you don't, let us know so that we can get you set up as fast as possible if you're running into issues. Let's review by looking at animals DB with ID. So we saw that this is how we could write comments. We don't do // we do -- when we're writing SQL. And each of these commands are listed here. Now, this file is not linked to anything. This file just has a series of SQL commands. In order for me to run them, I have to have some way of communicating with my database server. So what we would do in our database is our first organization level was the server. Our next organization level was the database. Then we had our table in columns. And all of this we're going to set up using this environment, the workbench, or you could use the shell, which would be a command line version of this effectively to do that as well. That's what typing in MySQL to the command line does. It opens up a shell that connects to the MySQL server that you've got going. And then within that, you could work with the different rows. So right at the beginning, we create that first level. So we've already connected to the server, and then we create a database. Sometimes we say in our scheme file, if we come back to it, let me see, where did I open that? Let's just grab this, put it in here. So the first thing we did is we drop a database if it exists. Otherwise, we'll get an error because it already exists, because stuff sticks around. We create that database, and then we use that database. We then say create the table with the name. Again, everything that's in uppercase is SQL commands. Everything that's lowercase is just names that we've chosen arbitrarily. I'll make a note for ID. Almost everyone just calls it ID. You're not going to see much stuff here that's a primary key other than that. You'll notice that we don't have primary key listed on the ID on this section. It's listed down here. Primary key ID, you could also just say primary key up here. Just depends on how you want to do it. So either way is fine. Just be consistent about it throughout the project or program that you're working on. If you want to change from homework to homework, try it out, that's fine. Just make sure that within the same project that you're working on, you're staying consistent. We learned about some of the different data types. What were some of the different data types we learned about?
Integers, booleans, varchar, varchar.
Yeah, what is varchar?
A string.
It's a string, basically. And then the number specifies, hey, how many characters are we going to have? Now, a lot of our examples have a display number for the integer associated with them. You might have received errors that say, hey, this is deprecated. In fact, it is, and a lot of times you will just see the word integer by itself or int by itself instead when working with these, and that's completely fine. Varchar, you're still going to need to put the numbers in the parentheses, but it's okay to drop them and just write int or integer without any numbers behind them, even though our examples have them. Either way is fine. And then we have our Boolean type. What does not null do? If some of these columns have not null and some of these columns don't, what does that mean?
It means that that value can't be null. It has to be filled in.
Right, has to be filled in with something. Now this name could be an empty string. It doesn't prevent it from being an empty string, but it has to at least be filled in with that empty string. It can't be null, it can't be nothing. We'll look later at ways that we can do validation. So we can say, hey, this name has to be at least 4 letters long. And we can build that into our data layer so that we don't have to think about that in the rest of our program as much. We'll just get an error if we try and save something with a name of that's too short to the database. Cool. So this is all about creating our structure. And if we remember from yesterday, I said that we basically always create this level, everything except the rows, before we run our node program. That's all stuff that we create in the workbench as kind of the setup. The same way that you might rent out an office building and your office workers don't need to care about that. They just walk in and the stuff is already set up, ready for them to go. And sure, they make modifications to some small things within it, but then that's just modifying the rows. So you just have the structure set up. Same way you would with, like, say, an Amazon warehouse. An Amazon warehouse, you've got the building already there. You've got the places where all the different stuff is happening. And then the packages would be the rows. Hey, we brought these new rows in, and the rows get moved and deleted, etc. But the structure overall that you're working with kind of stays the same. So this is a seed file. This kind of gives us some starting packages, to use the past analogy, where it says, hey, I'm going to just put some rows into the database. Now, remembering that this thing has an ID, how come I don't have to specify the ID on this? Like, has ID int auto increment not null, so it has to have a value, but I'm not passing it in when I run this insertion. How come it works?
Because it says auto.
Yeah, the auto increment means that we ask the database to handle that for us. It starts at 1, and then every subsequent row just gets the following available number, and it'll never backtrack. It'll never be like, oh, there's a 1 missing. I can relabel this one 2. If you delete row 2, you'll always be missing row 2 from that point forward. It'll just keep moving on. So if I run each one of these, let's go ahead and run this section. Actually, I think we already did. Let's go ahead and run this read command. Ice cream.people doesn't exist. That's right. Need to run all of this in its own section. Cool. So what we have here is Ahmed, and even though every other piece of data is the same, the ID is what lets us keep that unique. And then we've got update. And then we say set has pet equal to true, and the pet name equal to Franklin, and the pet age equal to 2, and then we put constraints on which one that applies to. In this case, it's where the ID is equal to 4, and then we can read from this. When thinking about all the operations that we can do with data, specifically around rows, the 4 different operations, what acronym did we have for that?
CRUD.
CRUD.
CRUD. And what does CRUD stand for?
Create.
Create,
Read.
Update.
Update.
update, delete.
And read, update, and delete. And these also match to HTTP methods and to SQL commands. Create. What's the HTTP method associated with create?
Post.
Post. Read is
Get.
get. Update is put
Put.
or patch. And delete is pretty straightforward, delete. In terms of SQL commands,
Insert.
what was create? Insert, or insert into, and then our table, in our case people, and then the different values. This one is select star from. This one is update. And then this one is delete from. Update. Set. Cool. So we can already see where there are going to be some lines of communications between our different route and different things that we do to the database, so that we can ask the server to do some things on our behalf as it talks to the database. And the server can do things like verify, hey, this all actually matches the format that we want. You're authorized to do this, things like that. But what we want you to do is just get a little bit of practice with this. And we're going to do that in exercise 04, programming DB. So inside here, we've got each one of these commands. And there's a few spots where we have comments that are going to ask you to fill in some different examples. So a great way to work with that is to reference 03, animals, db with id.sql. It's going to cover or give an example of everything you need to do in this section. We just want to give you practice with it. So we're going to go ahead and take about 10 minutes to work right on this at the beginning, fill in the table, create a couple of new examples using your workbench. Let us know if you run into any issues. We're going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms at this point. Good luck. Alrighty, folks, looks like everyone's back at this point, or at least the majority of us are. Let's go ahead and start filling this in. So now I get to pick someone random and we'll sort of popcorn our way through this. So, Andy, go ahead and help us on line 6. Or line 7, I guess the comment for line 6. Before we say we've just made a database, before we actually make the tables in the database, what do we got to do?
Let's see. Oh, use programming DB.
Use programming DB. Excellent. Go ahead and pick someone to fill in the next line for us.
I see Jordan.
All right, Jordan. So we need to create the ID column. How do we do that?
Integer auto increment not null.
Yeah, so
ID is the name.
Yeah, integer. And then auto increment not null. Am I missing anything that you said?
Nope, comma.
All right, cool. Awesome. Go ahead and pick someone to go next.
I'll go with Ashley.
All right, Ashley. So we want to create a string column called language. How would we do that?
So language, and then varchar, and then I put 50.
Sounds good. Anything else?
A comma? Good.
Seems good to me. Awesome. Let's go ahead and create an integer column called rating. Since we've already done one very similar to that, I'm just going to say rating integer right here. Ashley, go ahead and pick who goes next for this piece.
Maja.
All right, Hamaja. So we need mastered here.
So master boolean default true.
Cool. And then, Hamaja, go ahead and pick someone for this last section right here.
I see Marisa.
All right.
It's going to be primary key parentheses ID.
Excellent. All right. Good job, all. This looks pretty good. So we could also have had the primary key be up here if we wanted. If we're writing it our own, that's just not what the prompt was. Let's go ahead and make some example roles. So, Marissa, let's go ahead and
Should we set any values with the rating integer?
no, we don't need to add anything else to it.
Okay.
Same thing here. You can omit them. You could put 10 or 11 there if you wanted to, and that's not wrong, but we didn't. You don't have to, so we omitted. So insert into programming languages. And Marisa, could you go ahead and give me a programming language and how you feel about it?
Let's go with JavaScript.
JavaScript. That sounds pretty good. So we want to insert into programming. We're going to give the name of the columns. What columns do we need to include?
We need to include language, rating, and master.
Rating and mastered. The values, and then you said JavaScript, give JavaScript a rating for us.
Let's go with 7.
All right, 7 out of just 7. And then would you say that we have mastered it or no?
Nope.
All right, we're going to say we're not feeling that that's the case. Cool. Now, if we wanted to insert a couple of ones at a time, we could actually put a comma here and then just make a new set. So let's talk about CSS. This one's more open to the whole class. How do we feel about CSS as a whole? So thumbs up is 10, 0 is down, and then you can sort of interpolate between the two about how you feel about CSS. So I'm getting a lot of sidewayses, so that's like 5s. I'm getting a few ups. All right, so I'm going to call that about 7.5. We can't do 7.5 because this is an integer, so we'll round it up to 8. And mastered, we're going to say false. It's kind of hard to master CSS. There's a lot to do it, especially in the compressed time frame that we have had. So we can insert both of these at the same time, or we could keep going and add HTML and other things in there as well.
And since that's default to true, if there wasn't a value there, it would just be true.
So if I took out mastered, for example, and then removed these pieces, then it would insert them as true.
But if mastered is in there, do you have to include true or false?
Yes, because you're saying here that you're specifying a value for the column.
Copy.
Yeah, and another thing, this is not null, so if you try and put like null here, it'll just literally put null there. So you can force it to be null because explicitly. It'll just, if you don't provide a value, use default. It can still be null, so sometimes you'll say mastered boolean not null, default true, which means, hey, you have to provide a value for it, and if you don't provide one, it's true. So you can combine that, but the instructions didn't prompt you to do that, so not necessary. Cool. So we're able to put together that list of programming languages. Awesome. Now, yesterday we looked at ice cream read data. We have ice cream seeds.sql. We can see that it's got a schema very similar to the one that we just created. This is a seed file. It's called the seed file because it has values that it puts it in there. We often call a seed some starting data that the application would have right at the beginning. So if you wanted to have like an admin user, or you wanted to have a price of some items that are already like you're selling already on your database, you might include those in a seed file so that you have some data for your application to already work with. The schema portion of it is going to be all the structure. So everything before the rows is called the schema. If you're inserting new rows, that's called a seed. And you'll hear those terms thrown around quite a bit. So what we want you to do is we're going to be having you work on this a little bit as well. So we've got this playlist read activity we want you to go through. You're going to create a new database called playlistdb and with a table called songs. So make sure that you've done all of that with your SQL before moving on. So you can run select statements, make sure that it's all running in your workbench before you do that. After that, reference 07. You could even just copy and paste a lot of the pieces from here and create a JavaScript file that's going to connect to the database. Make sure that you've got the correct database with the correct password set. And then it's going to read out all of those different pieces. So it's going to have ID, title, artist, genre. And then we're going to print playlists to the console based upon the genre or artist. So you're going to say like, hey, let's find all of our ones where our artist is equal to, I don't know, Billy Joel, or our genre is equal to folk music or something like that. And then create code that prints songs of a specific genre artist to the terminal. If you finish early, you can look at using placeholder values, which will enable you to sort of more easily make those changes rather than having to dynamically build the entire string. There's a link to that if you want to look into that more. But for now, make sure you can make the table, make sure that you can connect to it, and then make sure that you can print that info to the terminal. Real quick thing I want to add, you'll see where it says console.log, the data from there. You can actually, I think console.table is built in. I'm trying to remember if it is. I know it is in the browser. I'm not sure if that'll work on my version of the desk or on my version of Node, but let's check it out. Let me just run that real quick. So I'm going to say node, and we labeled this ice cream read data.js. And if I'm using console.table, it looks like this as opposed to console.log. let's sort of look at the two next to each other. Console.log gives it to me in the traditional format of here's an array with a bunch of objects inside of it, versus console.table says, hey, look, all of these objects are kind of the same, so we're going to output it so that it looks like a table. This is the index of the item in the array. This is the ID column, the flavor column, the price column, the quantity column. Makes it a lot easier to look at and read when you're working with those. So you can just replace console.log with console.table to transform it from that into this. So that if you have things that look the same, it's a lot easier to follow, read, output, work with, etc. Cool. So we're going to open up the breakout rooms at this point. You're going to be working on this one for the next, let's see, 20 minutes at this point. If you have questions, let us know. We'd be happy to assist you, and we'll be going over this as well. How do we do all of this stuff? Again, great starting point for the second half of it is ice cream read data. Good luck. All right, folks, looks like we're still waiting for a few people to pile back in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So what we had here is we wanted to create a schema based off of the README. Let's go ahead and grab the pieces that we need. We'll come back to schema. A lot of times when you're first working on a project, one of the things you want to think about right at the beginning is, what is my data? What is my data? In our case, we're kind of given that, but as project 2 is coming up closer and closer, a great thing to think about is, what do I need to keep track of? Both in terms of what information am I displaying to the user, and operationally, what do I use to make sure that everything works correctly? We want to have a table that has all of these built into it. So let me pull up my notes so that I can make sure I'm consistent with what we write down. So I'm just calling this schema.sql. You might have called it playlist seeds or something else. All of that's fine. I'm going to comment this out. And so
What's standard on that? Just so I kind of understand. Like, what do
either
most
one
people use?
is fine. The schema is definitely going to be more like, hey, here's everything except the rows, and the seeds are going to be the rows. If you have both, it's kind of your choice. So drop database if exists, and we'll call it playlist DB. Then we'll create the playlist. DB. And use it. You're going to see this pretty much at the top of any of your schema files, or any file that defines a schema. That's pretty standard. Next, we want to create a table called songs. And it's going to have these properties. It's going to have an ID, it's going to have a title, it's going to have an artist, and it's going to have a genre. Now the ID is going to be int, not null, auto increment. I'm going to just tack on primary key right here. You could also have included it beneath there. If you want to explicitly label something as, hey, this might be blank, for example, we might not know a title. Seems unlikely we would have it in the database, but it's possible. Then we would have an artist and genre. We could say, hey, all of these should be null. And that's going to be a decision you make based off of your data. Is it okay to have an entry without a title, or without an artist, or without a genre? I would argue you should always at least have a title, because this is a database of songs, but maybe you don't know the artist offhand. Maybe it's like a folk song and you're not sure where it's from. And maybe the genre, you're like, it's sort of crossing, it doesn't fit nicely into a genre, so you're leaving it unlabeled as yet. But I would say that at least the title should be mandatory. And these are making decisions about your application. Excuse me. What should your application be like? So let's insert into here a couple of different songs suggestions. What should we include in our list?
Boys by the Beatles.
And what genre would you put that in? Just rock and roll?
Rock and roll.
All right. Let's grab another one. Let's grab another rock and roll song. What's another good rock and roll song?
Freebird.
Freebird. And the artist?
Leonard Skinner.
I forget how to spell his name.
It's fine.
It's like SK, isn't it closer to like Skinnerd or something like that?
Yeah, it's like Lynard and then the same in the back end.
Yeah. Sure, that's our person. They're a cover artist if it's not correct. And then let's add one more that's not in the classic or not in the rock and roll genre.
Bad Guy by Billie Eilish.
Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. And we'll go ahead and we'll add some formatting here. Bad Guy by Leonard Skinner. Not quite the same. I think that's how you spell her name. And I'm just going to put that under pop, even though kind of everything is that. Maybe electro pop, I don't know. Cool. And let's actually do one more that's not rock and roll or pop.
Chicken Fried by Zac Efron Band.
Zac Efron Band and what? What?
Zac Brown Band, I'm sorry.
What?
Zac Brown Band.
Zac Brown Band. I don't know all of these. I'm going to have to look them up later. And what would the genre be?
Country.
Country. All right. Woefully undereducated when it comes to music. So we've got all of this together. So this will allow us to sort of insert all of them together into our database. Let's go ahead and copy this into our workbench. Let's just summon that out of the ether. Looks like I have an extra comma there, which it doesn't like. Then we'll run it. Cool. Then we say select star from songs. And we can see each one of our entries. Cool. If I wanted to just see my country songs, how would I do that? What query would I write?
You could do select all from songs where genre equals country.
Genre equals country. And that gives us just the song Chicken Fried back. Or if I chose rock and roll. It returns those two, etc. So we're able, whenever you're thinking about, hey, I need my program to write a query or execute some kind of query, you want to make sure that it works correctly in your workbench before you try and translate it over to running inside of JavaScript. So I've got server.js. I've already installed the MySQL package. And I'm just going to go over to ice cream seeds, ice cream read data for this beginning connection. This is pretty much just going to be the same over and over again. The only thing that changes at this point is going to be what happens after I connect and my database. So looking at my schema.sql, my database is called playlistdb, so I'm going to copy that into here. And I'm going to be selecting star from. And then if we go back to my schema, I can see that I've labeled it songs. Come back here. And we'll even leave it in that console.table format. So we've got this part where we just say, hey, I'd like to get all of the different songs. And we'll just console.table it out. Now, if we wanted to, we could even say, I want to ask for different songs. So we could limit it by genre. So we could say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to label this one query all songs, as that's a better description of what it does. I'm going to label this one query pop songs. And I'm going to label this one query country songs. Now the difference is I'm going to need to say where something. In fact, I could combine any of these ones by genre because they're just going to be of the same format, but it's going to be where genre equals something, right? Where the genre equals something. And in fact, this question mark is something that MySQL understands. I can have a list of question marks and then pass in a value for it. So I could pass in an array, and the genre here is going to be pop. The genre here is going to be country. And in fact, I could just say query genre songs and combine these. So I could say query genre song. And then I would say, hey, here's the genre. And then this would be replaced with whatever the genre was. I could even build this into a promise where I could say return new promise, resolve reject. And so let's answer this question. When is the promise resolved? When are we successful at querying the genre of song?
When the connection ends, or you return that? Yeah.
Yeah, once we're in here. So we could say, I'm actually just going to say resolve whatever the response was. That's the data that I got back. We don't even need, and then if there is an error, instead of throwing it, we're going to reject that error. So we've, in a sense, promisified our result. So once that's done, now we can, and we could do the same thing for query all songs. The only difference is going to be that we're not going to take in a genre. So we'll return a new promise that encompasses the whole thing. We'll right click to format the document, and the internals will look the same.
And so you could call any of these functions in that connection.connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this case, what I'm going to do is query all songs. Then I'm going to take the results and console.log or console.table those results. And then I might say console.log or log all songs, console.log country songs, or I could then say query genre songs country, and I can say return that so that then I can trigger that on the next thing. Actually, we could do it this way. And then we could say console.table country songs. And then we could keep doing the same thing. And let's say rock and roll. When we labeled that country, it was uppercase C. That's important. We want to make sure that that's then rock and roll. And then we'll finish it up with pop at the end here. All right, let's run it, see if it works for us. And then at the very end, once that's done, we're going to call connection.end. If not, it'll leave the connection to the database open and our program won't quit. But we want to make sure that we do the connection.end afterwards. Otherwise, when we issue a new command to the SQL server, we won't have an open connection and we won't get any data back. So let's save this. And so let's say node server.js. And we got all of our songs. Then we've got our country songs, our rock and roll songs, and our pop songs. So we were able to build these pieces and promisify them, which means this doesn't care what needs to happen afterwards. It just says, here's the results. Do what you want to when you want to. So I can control the flow of this and what comes next really easily. I don't have to pass in a callback, or I don't have to write hard code ahead of time what happens. Using promises like this really gives you the freedom to change the order of things you want. For example, if I want to do country songs second after rock and roll instead of before rock and roll, it's pretty easy to do. I'm just going to change the order of these pieces. So I might say like, all right, let's do rock and roll instead. So I'll just take rock and roll. We'll relabel them. It's all just there, and it's fairly easy to follow what I'm doing along the way. Let's go ahead and actually take this one step further and convert this into async await, which will make it even easier. So I'm going to say, let's just copy this. We'll comment it out for now. And I'm going to say await, or const all songs equals await this. And then I'm just going to console.log all songs. Then I'm going to console.table all songs. And then I'm just going to repeat this for any of my genre songs. So if I want to start out with rock and roll, const rock and roll equals await query genre songs rock and roll. Then pretty much just repeat this same process. Then we'll do the same thing for country and pop. And these things just go one after another. Any questions so far?
Where did you add the async part?
The async part up here, that's to say that we're using await inside of a function. If you use await inside of a function, you have to mark it as async.
So the callback function after connection or connect, that's the async function. You don't have to change your query genre songs or query all songs functions at all?
So these already return a promise, and we don't use await inside of them, so we don't need to mark them as async.
Okay.
We're only doing that because this is waiting for the query genre songs promise to resolve before getting that value. Now, if we're being good about this, lots of stuff could go wrong in the database. So what we're going to do is try to do all of this. If there's an error, we'll log out the error and we'll say connection.end. We'll actually do that as finally. If you want to do something either after a error, let's see, there we go. So if there's an error, we want to console.log out the error. If everything goes fine, this is what we want to do. Let's format that to make it a little bit easier to see. Finally, let's just close off the connection, whether it worked or whether we encountered a problem along the way. And so that's what lets us do all of these sequence in a pretty nice series of events. If we do it this way, we've got our two helper functions that we'll write up here. They will want to have references to the connection. So we'll put the connection up here. We'll change this to be const. And that's our program. In 65 lines, it queries our database, and it just asks for each one of the pieces. I'm going to go ahead and post this in Slack, as it's going to be different than the version that we posted in the solved version, but they're doing the same thing fundamentally. So, questions?
I just wanted to clarify. So, and you keep the first if error, throw error, because that one is referring to if it is even able to connect in the first place, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, so we could throw that in there, but this is basically saying, hey, when you connect, what do you do? And right at the beginning, we just say, hey, if there was an error connecting, then just throw an error. But which we could put inside this try block, and then just catch it and close it down and say an error occurred. Like, nothing wrong with putting that in here. And that thrown error will get caught by this catch block, and we can just say console.log something went wrong, and then the error, and then we'll close out our connection.
If you do async, do you have to do function and not, you can't do like a arrow function there?
You could do an arrow function. So you could say async error this way. I'm not sure about the syntax. If like everywhere supports that, they're going to support async function more of the time, but I believe you can do this just fine as well.
Okay, thank you.
Again, sometimes it depends on your node version, because async await relatively new features, so not necessarily every version of node is going to work with that. I know that it will work when you use function correctly there. So. And that's one reason why we like await async. It's a lot easier to kind of see what you're doing. And whenever you see await, you know there's a promise, and when the promise is fulfilled, we'll proceed from that point, and if the promise is rejected, we'll come down and catch it here. The only thing we really added extra to it than the solution we posted is we made these things promises that returned the result, instead of making it so that they just console.logged out whatever immediately after. Cool. So I want to kind of demo each one of the CRUD actions in this next section, 09 ice cream CRUD. And so it has the same seeds as last time. I'm going to run npm install. And let's take a look at the program. This one does it in a more callback-based format rather than a promise-based format, which can make it a little bit trickier to string operations together. But let's see how it does it. So we start out, and we're actually not going to be going in order. We're going to be creating, updating, deleting, and then reading. But Cutter doesn't sound like a very great acronym, so we're going to still call it all of our CRUD actions, just not necessarily in the same order. So to make this work, I need to still update the password like I'm going to do with most of these exercises with my database password. I'm going to connect, and then I'm going to call create product. And we can see here again that same question mark syntax, but this time the question mark is replacing a whole object. So we're inserting into products, and you're noticing we're using the set format instead of the values format. The set format is another way that you can insert stuff the same way that you would update something, except in this case, we're passing it an object. And that object is going to be full of the different key value pairs. If we were going to write this out, it might look something like this. Insert into products, set flavor equal Rocky Road. I forget if I need a comma there. I don't think I do. Price equals 3.0. Quantity equals 50. Let me go look back at the update real quick. Our update statements that we were looking at before. Sometimes I just need to remind myself. Okay, we do need the commas. That's what happens when you move between a bunch of different languages all the time. You're like, does this need it? Does that need it? And so you have to go back and double check quite a bit. Let's go back to our exercise just to make that correct. Cool. So this is the SQL that this generates. Because we can see a bunch of what amount to key value pairs, the MySQL driver lets us represent that as an object. And then it even has a question mark here that says, hey, just give me an object and I will turn that question mark into, or that object into these associations, these key value pairs that SQL understands. So that's something that the MySQL package is doing for us, so that we can reuse this, kind of like we did when we were doing query by genre. And it let us swap in what the genre is, but this time with a whole object. Now, it'll still error if I put in something that doesn't exist, or I forget if it errors or if it just ignores it. But if I try and put in something like awesomeness, and that's not a field in my database, that's either going to cause an error or it's just not going to get inserted. Which is another nice thing about it. I'm never going to accidentally write a query like that. Once that's done, our response is going to tell us, hey, how many affected rows, which is basically going to say how many things got inserted, just as a kind of report, and then it's going to call update product. If you're ever curious as to what a query is, when you say connection.query, you can get back a query object, and that query object can let you know, hey, here's the SQL that you wanted to work with. For update product, we say update products, set question mark, where question mark. In this case, we've got two sets of question marks. If we were going to write it all out, it would look like this. So question mark, set quantity equal to 100, where flavor equals Rocky Road. So this is the equivalent of this, but again, we are allowed to have question marks to keep it a little bit more flexible. So where the quantity is 100, I could easily have substituted this out for something else. Where the flavor is Rocky Road, I could easily have substituted that out for something else. Maybe I would want to mark something or update all the prices on something. Hey, I want to take 10% off everything. I want it to always match. So I'm going to just set the price to be, maybe we're having some sort of sale and it's like Subway's $5 foot long sale or something where it's like, hey, it's $5 for all of these different things. You could change it there pretty easily. So this is all about letting us use native JavaScript data structures to describe what we want rather than having to manually create these strings based off of it.
And if you had more than one update, could you do like a second quantity, like 50 flavors, strawberry or whatever?
Yeah, so if you wanted to do another one, you would probably just call this a query again, but then you would provide different objects to it.
Okay,
so you could keep the
can't.
query the same, but then you would switch what you were providing to it. And so once that happens, it tells us the number of affected rows. Since we just inserted Rocky Road just now, we're expecting that to be 1, but that's what we expect to happen. I'm going to take that back out now at this point. And then finally, we arrive at delete product. So can I have someone help me out what this query is going to look like? So delete from products. Where, and then what will be
Flavor.
next?
Flavors equals
Flavor.
strawberry.
Yeah, where flavor equals, if I can type correctly today, where flavor equals strawberry. So if I wanted to swap this out or even provide some other criteria, maybe like where ID equals 3, I would change this down here to be where ID is equal to 3, or it could be some variable that gets passed in as well. So it allows us to have a lot of flexibility. So I could pass that into delete product. Hey, what product do you want to delete? We could just pass in strawberry like this, like flavor name, like so. And then we could say, oh, I want to delete the flavor strawberry, or maybe even if I put something in there that doesn't exist in my database, like pistachio, and then it would say, well, we ran the query, we deleted everything that was pistachio, but what would come back? It would say that we had 0 affected rows. Not necessarily an error, won't error out, it just didn't do anything. It's still a successful command that was executed, if that was the case. So let's change this back to the way it was. Cool. And then read products. In this case, we don't have any question marks, so we don't need to provide any additional information. It's just saying select star from products, so we don't need another entry that says, here's us filling in all the question marks, because there aren't any. So if you have a question marks, like if we wanted to say where price is less than question mark, I could then fill this in with, hey, where price is less than 50, we're going to call that, or not 50, but if the price is under $2, then we're going to say that's a cheaper flavor of ice cream or something like that. So you can put all of that together and you can have it fit into different structures like that. Now, that's great for when we'll talk about some scenarios where you're going to need to use double question marks. Single question marks have some protections around them so that you can't run something crazy like a SQL injection. Double question marks allow you to be a little bit more dynamic about your approach, but also open you up to more errors. We'll talk about that when they come up in the curriculum. Cool. Any questions? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the breakout rooms, and we want you to, as a group, go through this file and explain what's happening on each line. How does it work? What is the resulting SQL that gets created? And run it to see the results. Check in your database what's happening along the way. So it should, after it's run each one of these, tell you how many things that it did, and then give you out the SQL command. You can even compare that against your own database. So when we get back from lunch, we're going to be working on a application that sort of emulates like an auction system, like eBay or something like that, called Great Bay, which should be pretty fun. We're looking forward to it. In the meantime, we want you to just do a little bit of analysis. If you're still running into any issues, we're also going to use this time to help you figure out any things. But if you have questions, let us know. But we want you to analyze this, discuss it in your groups. If you finish early, you feel like you've got a good grasp on it, try entering new queries into the chain. Try adding another flavor besides strawberry, etc. Try playing with it and adding new features. Cool. All right, so we're going to open up the breakout rooms. We'll see you later. Good luck. All right, folks. Welcome back. So we are going to be working this afternoon in our groups on a project, and it's not going to be a web server project. It's just going to be using Inquirer, Node, and our newly acquired database skills. So you're going to be using Inquirer and MySQL in order to make this application. So this application is called Great Bay, and it allows you to bid on items, task jobs, whatever. So kind of like an eBay. There's going to be a couple of different menu items when you start it up. So I'm going to say node Great Bay basic.js. Oh, I forgot to update my password. Let me do that really quick. That's my password for my database because this uses a database. And I'm greeted with two menu options at the beginning. So if we're trying to think about how our UI flows, it's good to start out and go, okay, we've got one right at the beginning, and it's going to lead to one of two areas, either posting or bidding. Series of questions based off of that. Let's go with post because we can't really bid on something if it doesn't exist yet. So we'll say post. What item would you like to submit? So here's a series of questions in the post. Let's say headphones. What category? Let's put that in electronics. The starting bid, let's say $40. Cool. And now I can say other things as well. What item would you like to submit? Let's say that I want to submit a chair, and I want to put that in furniture, etc. We'll start the chair off at $60. So we've got each of these different ones. So let's then move over to bid. So I now have an option which one of these I want to grab. And it's pulled these out of the database. If I want the headphones, let's say that I try and lowball it at $10. It's going to say your bid was too low, try again. So you can come back, bid on it, click on headphones, how much would you like to bid? Let's try $100. Your bid is placed successfully. Now if someone tries to go back there and bid underneath $100, even if it was larger than the original price, it's still too low. This is kind of the minimum we're hoping that you get done today. We'd like you to add other things like keeping track of who had the highest bid, being able to browse by category, things like that. But if you think about it, we've got two main paths. After we ask for it, they have established that they want to bid. We're going to hit our database, see what's available. Then with that bid, they'll either, for posting a bid, you kind of ask all the same questions and then return. So this is us going down the post route. This is us going down the bid route. With the post route, it's pretty direct. We're just going to come here, then we're going to submit our questions, and then we loop back. With the bid, we're going to have another spot where we say, hey, from a UI perspective, which one do you want and how much? Then, depending on that, we either send them back, hey, you got it, we update our database, and we return back here, or we say sorry, and we just go direct here. So the user sees it kind of like this, but there might be more states in between. So thinking about having a function that kind of handles each one of those can be a helpful guiding principle when thinking about those. The instructions will help detail a little bit more about that, but that's kind of the example we were running with there. So if you look inside the instructions, it sort of takes you through that whole process we just went through. Don't worry about setting up a truly secure database to try and handle a username and password if you tackle that add-on. In here, you could try adding on extra things. Basically, once, if you get past that part, then we're going to say, hey, try adding a login system so that there's a username and password. Don't worry about being too secure about it. Make you enable so that you can browse by category or see all of the items you've posted specifically. See the ones on which you're the leading bidder. Allow an admin to modify it as they see fit. Create more visually appealing tables. Create a search function. So we just sort of demoed the basic functionality, and then in your groups, you're going to be able to take it further if you want. So let's talk about the order that I kind of recommend you do things in. The first thing is think about your data, which means thinking about your tables. In this case, you probably just need one. You probably just need one. And then once you've done the tables, that's going to be all the columns that you need to have. What pieces of data do you need to keep track of? What are the types? So start out with your schema. Next, once you have your schema in place, then you can start writing your node application, thinking about your inquirer questions. What are the things that you're going to ask the user? What are the different branches that the user can get down in the UI? Once the user has done that, think about the queries. that you'll need. Try them out first in the workbench. The workbench is really easy because you can just write the query you want. See if it represents what you need to do. Think about the CRUD actions. Think, am I creating a new row? Am I reading from rows? Am I updating rows? Am I deleting rows, etc.? And then you can encode it in a function, kind of like we wrote earlier. So you can say, all right, I wrote a function that does this, and it can work as a promise for me, and then I can keep going, etc. So that would be the order I recommend you approach things in. Think about the table, set up your schema, then you can share that schema file between your group, and then you can work on the inquirer questions. You can easily set up those questions as separate functions as well. And that can be quite helpful. So if you have questions about any of this, let me know. Let us know. We'd be more than happy to help you out. But that's what we're going to be building this afternoon. So we're going to open up the breakout rooms. And this is what we'll be working on for the rest of the day. On Monday, we're going to introduce working with multiple tables as well as working with bigger data sets through the concept of joins. If you are curious about that early, you can ask me, but you should be good to go for anything you need to do homework-wise at this point. But we'll talk about joins more on Monday. So we're going to open up the breakout rooms at this point. If you have any questions, this grade bait assignment is just an in-class assignment. There's no grade associated with it. You're just going to be working on it this afternoon to practice working with SQL and working with Node connecting to SQL. Good luck.
Hello.
Hi, sorry.
No worries.
Thought that it was empty. I was like, oh no.
Like, it's just me. I am the class now. Let's see. Ah, you were with
Neo and Rogan and Valley.
Cool. Yeah, okay. Send you in there.
Alrighty, folks. So last thing we're going to do today, it's Friday, is we're going to just review this. There's a couple MySQL pages that just got pushed up on the Notion, and Michelle just posted that in the Notion channel. So I encourage you to review that, check it out. We will be continuing with MySQL for next week. So any practice you want to do over the weekend would definitely be to your benefit. Just the more you use it, the more used to it you'll be. But let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we want to look at the structure of our data. And this is kind of what you need at a minimum. If you added other features, you might need other pieces as well. For example, you might include like the seller name on this auction, for example, or the current highest bidder's name or something like that, or at least an ID or something like that. Now, let's look at it. So we see ID, int, not null, auto increment. You're going to see this probably on every table you write. You're going to see an ID column. Next, we've got the name of the item and its category. We give a different amount of space for each one. The categories are a little bit more restricted than the item names, and both of these are mandatory. You have to have it. Now, for the starting bid, I'm going to change the lowercase default to an uppercase default here, because that's just part of. So the starting bid and the highest bid start out at 0. And then you've got a primary key for the ID. So this is all run in the SQL Workbench before we do anything else. This is going to establish our data. Oftentimes it's good to insert a couple test ones. So we might say insert into auctions. Let's say that we're selling set item name equal to earbuds, and the category is electronics. Oh, have to actually, there we go. And then we need a comma. There we go. So now that's in there, let's take a look. Select star from auctions. Cool. So next we might think about the different actions that we need. One of them is going to just be get a list of those items, which would be select star from auctions. The next thing that we would want to do is insert into auctions, but we would also include a starting bid. So we might say something like starting bid equals 10. Or something like that. That's an example. And finally, we might want something like, hey, we need to update one of these to say, hey, based off of the ID or maybe based off of the name, we need to update the highest bid. So we might say update auctions, set highest bid equal to 20, where ID equals 1. Or it might be where name equals something like that. So once you have your data, it's good to think about how your data will change and sort of write some queries that will match that. These queries aren't necessarily going to be something you include in your program immediately, but it's good to think about how the data will change or be accessed. So we don't have any deletes in this program, but we do know that we're going to be making new bids, looking at those bids, and updating those bids. So having the SQL in those forms is helpful to reference later when you're writing your JavaScript functions. Any questions so far?
Would you want your starting bid or highest bid to be an integer, or would you rather it be a decimal?
It's up to you. You could use a decimal if you want to include cents versus if you're just doing whole dollar auctions where you're like, it's 120 bucks or it's something like that where you don't want the cents to matter. You can just use an integer. Alternatively, you could store it as the number of cents and then on your front end, just convert it over to dollars if you wanted to do something like that. So it's up to you how you want to store it. But if you don't want people to be able to bid like fractions of a cent more. It's like, how much do you bid more? Well, I bid 0.12 more than that. And that's not, or like, let's say that you say .99 and then someone says .999 and then someone says .999. So they're not really outbidding it. They're just shifting it. You want to avoid that kind of behavior. And integers are good for that. I just think about what would a junior hire do? And that usually helps me. Cool. So that's kind of our base where we know what will happen to the data. The next view that we'll look through is through the lens of the user. How are we going to craft the menu system? And then once they ask what to do with that, then we can sort of build some pieces in the middle. So sometimes you'll start from more of a data side. Sometimes you'll start from more of a user side. Nevertheless, we still need to join the two together. So thinking about this, we had some different points. At the beginning, we ask, hey, do you want to post, bid, or exit? And we really don't care about the exit option because they just quit the program at that point. Not much more to do. But if they click post, then we've got a sequence of events that happens. Basically, we get a bunch of inquirer questions. So if they post, they get asked a bunch of inquirer questions, and then the data changes, where we take all the data that they gave to us, we make sure that it gets inserted into the database, and then we'll loop back around to here. And so we can think about it at these different levels. Let's go this. And then this one, we'll loop back around to here. If it's a bid, then we're going to hit the database with a read, which means a select statement. And then from there, we're going to prompt them for what's your new bid. And if that succeeds, we either then have another statement that does an update. So at this point, we're either updating and then going back, or we didn't get the bid and we just go straight back. So we kind of can think of each one of these circles or each place we stop as a function. We might group some of them together, but it's good to think about all the stops along the way, each period of asynchronous activity where you're asking the user something or you're talking to the database. Each one of those is going to be a synchronous step. So let's look at how that manifests in this particular program. So we start out, we connect to the database, and after we connect to the database is when we kick off everything else. So we connect. If there's an error, we throw an error. Otherwise, we start. Boom, let's look in here. So our first thing is we do inquirer.prompt. That's our first one. That's our first one at the beginning. And then depending on their answer, we either direct them to the post auction set of functions or the bid auction set of functions. If it's exit, we just end the program's over. So we don't really bother worrying about that one too much. You could if you wanted to include a little message like goodbye or a review or any other cleanup activities you need to do. Let's start with post auction. So we already looked at this previously and we know that we need to do something like insert into auction, set something. So first of all, we need to get answers to those questions. So we prompt, what is the item you would like to submit? What category? What would you like the starting bid to be? This piece is a little bit new. You can do some validations. The validations will let you say, hey, is this a valid number or not? So if they type in ASDF, you're like, nope, starting bid can't be that. It has to be something we can change into a number. This function looks at their prospective number and then says, yes, that's right, or no, that's wrong. Cool. Once that's done, then we just built the insert right into it, and then we'll call the start function again. So that's our loop back around to the top. So in this case, we insert into auction, set question mark, and we say the item name as answer.item based off of their answer to the first question. The category is answer.category based on the answer to the second question. And the third question is going to have a starting bid. So the starting bid or 0 if they didn't type in a valid number, and the highest bid follows that same pattern. So by default, we just let it be 0 pretty much. And assuming that there's no errors, we created it successfully, and we jump back to the top of the start where it asks us, hey, do you want to post or bid? So we've gone through one of our actions, the insert into set. The set was just replaced with a question mark, and then we had each of those, an object that represented each one of those pieces. Cool. So let's look at bid auction. First of all, before we even prompt the user, we need to say, hey, guess what? Here are your options. And we need to go get those options. So we just say select from options. Once we get the results, as long as there's no errors, we're going to ask, which one do you want? Now, Inquirer doesn't have a lot of great options, unfortunately, for choosing things by ID or something like that. So we kind of cheat it out a little bit. We say, hey, we're going to make sure that the name matches. You can choose something, and as long as you choose something by the name, we're kind of counting on no two listings having the exact same name. Then we'll match that up and go from there. So this choices array is based off of our results. So we can actually see that we have a choice array. We go through each one of our results and then push it into our choice array and then return whatever that is. This is a way that we can make the choices a little bit more dynamic. You could also just evaluate it at that point. Like you could make it results.map. Let's actually do that real quick. Like if I was going to write this, I would probably just say results.map result.item name, and that would work just fine. It's a little bit less typing, but that's effectively what we're doing. But here's the long form version that we set up here. Cool. That's more to inform you that you can do something like that. So the message what auction would you like to place a bid in? We then prompt them for how much would you like to bid? This would be another great place to put validation. We didn't include it in this spot, but to make sure that they're including a number of some kind. But if it's not a number of some kind, it'll get thrown out later in the logic, and we'll see why. But it's good to provide that feedback earlier to the user rather than later. So in this case, we're going to go through the same process, and we're going to find the item with that. So another way of saying this would be const chosen item equals results dot find, where item dot underscore or item dot item underscore name is equal to whatever they chose. These two kind of do the same thing. This one's a little bit more expressive about it. We're just trying to find the thing that matches what they were looking for. Once we have the chosen item, then we can check, is the bid high enough? And it's kind of a blind auction. We don't tell them how much the thing was. We just say, hey, you can bid on it, and you either bid more or you bid less, excuse me. So if the bid is less than our bid, then we're going to update. If it's not, sorry, your bid was too low, we jump back to the start. Let's look into if it is high enough. If it is high enough, well, then we need to update our data. We're going to need to update our auctions and set the highest bid to be whatever the new bid is, where the ID matches up, and we get the chosen item ID because we were able to find it. Again, it's a little nebulous. It doesn't handle if you have things with the same name particularly well, where you could only bid on one of those, but that's just a limit of using Inquirer in this case. There's other ways around that, but we're not going to look at that at the moment. Cool. So your bid was too low, try again and start it, etc. So that's the Great Bay app. And it's already 2:30. If you have questions over this, we'll answer those in office hours, or we'd be happy to answer all those. We'll be starting that in about 2 minutes. Gives me a chance to go get some water, gives a chance for the TAs to get set up for one-on-ones. We're just going to be answering any questions around this. When we come back on Monday, we're going to be doing more SQL. We're going to dive into combining data from different tables with joins, as well as working with bigger data sets. So we'll be working with stuff that's thousands of rows instead of fives of rows. Cool. So we'll be getting started in 2 to 3 minutes. It was wonderful having y'all in class this week. If you have to take off, we'll see you on Monday. If not, we'll see you in just a few minutes. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you.
You're muted.
There we go. Much better. Thank you. So, wanted to begin with any questions over the activity we just went over. We'll start with that.
I was hoping to see, looking at that function that you were running for making all of the items that are already in the database put into the choice array, because I didn't quite get that.
For sure. So let's walk through it a little bit more slowly. So we make a choice array, and then we just go through and we push in results I dot item name, and then we just return the choice array.
Okay, and the results.
And the results are from our database call.
Okay. Okay, I think that's where I was lost of where we got that.
Yeah, me too. That connects it.
Prompt. It was, yeah. It's, I guess what was getting me was that we have a whole function and an array and everything inside of the dot prompt inquire function already, and I think that's where I was lost.
For sure. And that's more to show that you can run functions to do that. Like if you wanted to generate random numbers in your array, you could put them there, for example, like, hey, choose a random number or something like that. You could also just literally put, I think it's easier to say results.map result.item name. We'll do the same thing. Just if you're not as familiar with the array functions, it might be feel a little more magical. It's basically doing the same thing underneath the hood.
I'm happy to yield to questions further about what we just went over, but I was wondering if you could, this might benefit everybody also who stayed on, if you could go over, if I could like share, because my Heroku app is still not deploying for some reason. I just don't understand it.
All right, sure. We can take a quick look at that. I'll stop the share and
awesome, thank you.
We can go through the process in real time.
Okay. So this is.
Yeah, do you mind pulling it up on GitHub so we can just see it there too?
So here's my GitHub, just how it is. And then in Heroku, when I open app, that's what it gives me. And then
for sure. So click on view logs and now click on more and click on restart all dynos.
I did that earlier.
Right, and now what we're going to watch for is what error popped up.
Sweet.
So we can see it's changed from crash to starting. It's trying to start a process with npm start. And then what does it say? Cannot find module /app/server.js. So let's again go to your GitHub real quick. And normally you don't want to have a develop folder there. You'd want to move everything out there. There is no /app/server. There's a /develop/server. But that's how you would look for the errors when it starts up. So your package start isn't quite working the way that you want. So we can actually do this on GitHub. Go over to GitHub real quick.
Yep.
And go to package. You have a package lock. Go to note taker. Sorry, the level above this one. Because that's the root of your repository. So click on that, package lock JSON, and also, yeah, you're going to probably run into some other issues here. The easiest thing to do would be literally to hoist everything out of your develop folder.
What's the easiest way to do that without messing up everything else?
For sure. So do you have it locally? Like, can you open it up in Finder?
Yeah, of course.
All right, so just highlight everything over there and then just drag it over a column. Cool, and then you can delete the develop folder. And now just make sure that you're adding and committing on GitHub. Another quick thing we're going to do, can you open up that in Visual Studio Code?
So it just made some big changes there.
Yeah, made quite a bit of changes. The big thing is that it's looking at your node modules. And normally you don't want your node modules to be part of that. So we're going to delete your node modules folder really quick. So go ahead and delete it. And you still have all your dependencies, so that's fine. So we're going to make a new file called a .gitignore.
Okay, I was going through this earlier with Courtney, and I hadn't done it before.
Yeah, so .gitignore. This is going to be a list of folders or files that Git shouldn't look at. So you're just going to say node underscore modules slash.
That's what I was missing earlier, modules slash.
Yeah, so you're saying, hey, don't pay attention to that folder. In fact, and now on your terminal, go ahead and run npm install. Cool.
Sweet.
And now if you look at your, yeah, all of that with the, so now you shouldn't see any changes around that. So you'll want to, I think, adding commit and it'll work. We'll want to make sure that that worked correctly before we deploy it. But you can just go into your terminal and say git add space dot. And then git commit space -m and then your message. And then try git push.
Do I have to origin master?
No, you should just be able to say git push. It's on local master and local master tracks origin master.
Gotcha.
So that should be already done. All right, let's go back to GitHub and just verify that it's the way we think it is. Cool, so we don't see a node modules folder, which is good. We don't want to see a node modules folder. And then we've got server.js up at the top level, along with the package.json and everything else, etc. You'll notice that extra file called .ds_store, that's a Mac file. And that's another thing you can include in your git ignore next time, but it's not that big of a deal.
So it'd be so for in the git ignore, it'd be .ds_store slash.
Well, you don't need a slash because it's not a directory.
Got it, okay.
So let's go back to Heroku and let's redeploy it. So not just kicking it off again, but actually redeploying it from GitHub.
Did not want to do that.
Yeah, so if you just click on the deploy link, or just click on whichever one is fine. So deploy. You can watch there to make sure it works. It'll also say if it has any building dependent or issues in here. So this is a good thing to just keep an eye on. You can also click view build log, but it looks like it was successful. So let's click on view. See if it works. There it is.
Pow. Hope everything works still. Well, that doesn't work. It works locally.
So you can open up the console and see if things are going, or if you're getting errors there, etc. Is a good way to do it.
I knew I should save that change.
So I think you're good from this point.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Sorry.
No worries.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's often how you're debugging things on Heroku, is you're either restarting the service if there's an error there, or you're checking in the build if it didn't build correctly, and you want to make sure you've got your package.json and your server.js at that top level generally. Extra folders generally don't do well with Git anyway. Like if you have an extra folder in there, a lot of stuff is going to not know how to handle it as well automatically. But other questions? And the more and more you do deployments, the more and more you'll get used to all the different weird things that can go wrong.
So, like a general rule, should we try and deploy to Heroku frequently, or just like once we've finished the project? Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. There we go. I tend to like to deploy a lot because you catch deployment issues faster and you know kind of what change broke it much faster. So you're like, hey, this works locally. I'm going to deploy it. I'm not done. And then it breaks on the deployment. And you're like, something I did in between now and when I deployed it broke it.
Okay.
Now, and that's good for homeworks, and oftentimes in a professional environment, you'll have staging environments where you can try stuff out, essentially. You usually don't want to just necessarily ship, you're like, oh, look, we found a deployment issue, and now our website's down. So usually you'll have a staging environment. We'll talk about that, setting up a staging pipeline around project to show you how to do that. But yeah, I like to deploy often. In fact, one of the options is to deploy whenever the master branch updates. I like to do that.
Cool.
Any other questions, folks?
Do you mind if I take a look at that choices thing again, or if they post it up somewhere where I can take a look at that?
Well, we could look at it now, but it will also be pushed up
Okay,
by the TAs in a little bit. But what part specifically?
It's so I was trying to do what you were showing is results.map.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to have, I thought the same exact thing as you. I just used different words. So it's like I got res instead of results.map, and then your result item name. And I just keep getting faults back that you must provide a name parameter.
Did you include a name parameter like choice on there?
Okay. Yeah. That'll do it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, this one's a little bit easier to follow. We basically say, hey, the choices are all the different names, and then we find the item with that name in order to move forward. So that's our inquirer interface. If we were trying to get around it, I might say result.id plus dash plus result.item name. And then this would be equal to item ID is equal to answer.choice dot split dash 0 or something like that. That's a way to get around it a little bit. Again, it's not wonderful because Inquirer doesn't really let you have a lot of linked information together there. But this essentially says, oh, we're going to put the ID and the dash whatever, and then we say when we're looking for it, okay, what was the first part before the dash? Which would help us if multiple people, for example, listed the same item. Like, hey, I'm selling earbuds. My wife is also selling earbuds. Which one is it? And so by including the ID on there, that could actually help. In fact, let's run that again. So let's make sure that that works. It should, but it's good to always have it be there. Solved ls npm install node Great Bay basic.js. Let's bid, and then there's the earbuds. So I could just say 1 earbuds. It finds it. How much would you like to bid? 100, and then it says cannot read property highest bid of undefined. Interesting. Oh, I used strictly equals. Lol. And that won't work because this is a string and this is a number. So it would keep that from working. I'd like to bid on earbuds, like to bid 100. Oh, I didn't save it. Da, da. Any other questions? So later, next week, what we're going to learn is how instead of using bid auction and using inquirer.prompt to say, hey, I would like these results, and console.logging them out, we're going to see how we can instead respond to a web request. So a web request comes in and says, hey, I would like to see all the items that are available, and then we send a list of them back. They might say, I would like to submit a bid, and then we can go cool and then do all the comparisons here. So we're kind of, if we think about the stack as being all of these different pieces on top of each other. So I like to draw it this way, where up is closer to the user and down is closer to the database, because that's generally the path that stuff flows. The user wants to do something, which results in changes in the data. Or the user needs to get some information, which is stored in the database, and then ultimately brought back. So oftentimes you're going to see the browser, the web server, and the database. And this is why we call it the stack, because it's just things stacked up on top of each other. So what stack is, what suite of technologies make up sort of these different tiers that you're working with. So for this is our browser, that's our client, but that could also be like a phone app or something like that up at the top. In the middle, that's our web server that's written in Express, or written with Express. So, and JavaScript, Node.js, and then we've got MySQL as our bottom layer. So thinking about each one of those. So right now, we're sort of living here. Where a web server would be interacting with MySQL. But later, we'll see how we can actually group all of that together, because we're just using Inquirer as kind of a stand-in for a web request. But you can think, hey, I would get an object in the body of a post request that would describe this exact same thing, where I would be moving forward with this connection query based off of not answers from Inquirer.prompt, but based off of a post request or something else like that. And we'll see how it all fits together a lot more tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, no class tomorrow, Monday. This Friday has had some serious Thursday energy for me. I don't know if that's true for y'all, but it's just been like, man, this feels like a Thursday. And then every hour or so, I'm like, oh, it's Friday. That's awesome.
Yeah, Eric, when are you going to push the solutions to this activity we just did?
It should be pushed up in just a little bit. It'll definitely be by the end of today at the latest, if not sooner.
Okay, hey, and also to add to that, I noticed in a lot of the supplemental folders for the other parts that we've done, there's a bunch of algorithm problems. They're all are unsolved, but none of them have the solved folder. Is that something that you all will be doing like at the end? Or is that something that you all can really just do a quick push on those?
So let's take a look. So if we look in supplemental, or sorry, in algorithms, you'll see that we should have the solved version of that pushed up, but we'll push that up in a bit. Make sure that works for you.
Yeah, I just noticed that, and I mean that'd be helpful. You know, it's not like I have time to go there and really work on those, but just reading through that, I'm sure I can learn. I can learn a lot, and having the solutions would be very beneficial.
Yeah, I thought we had. I'll double check to make sure that that's the case.
Cool, cool. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. And if you look here, so fun little forecast, we've got MySQL, MVC. MVC is more of a pattern. It's not a specific technology, but a way we're using the technology that we've already learned. And then full stack practice integrating everything together, starting from the user filling out a form on a web page all the way to that information getting to the database. And then we get into project 2. Full stack web development already in project 2. And then after project 2, we're going to be introducing some alternatives like MongoDB instead of MySQL. We're going to be looking at progressive web apps as a way to sort of make a client that almost feels more like a phone client and how much it sticks around rather than just a web site. So something that can work offline even with PWAs. And then React is going to be kind of a new way of doing the front end that is also very popular. We'll look at all of those technologies merged together, and then we'll finish it off talking about some things like data structures and algorithms, common fodder for interview questions, and then we'll get into project 3. So we're basically halfway done with the course at this point. You're kind of at the midpoint, which is exciting and intimidating and scary all at once. And I have to say, it's a tough course, but you all have been doing wonderful at it. You've been working really hard. You've been asking a ton of questions and working at it. It's okay to not get it all at once. The important thing is more you keep working on it, keep at it. There's going to be a lot of times where you're probably going to, even I've had students They finish the course, they go back and they just kind of go through it again. They rewatch the videos and they redo the activities. Now, with the benefit of having done it before, for example. So being able to go back and redo activities helps a lot, especially when you're not in this compressed time frame. And then I've also had students who are like, cool, I feel like I worked really, really hard in here. And I felt like I really grasped the material, and I'm going to start applying for work, and then they get work. So it's all going to be really up to you how to do it. We're going to be trying to show you all the best ways to take advantage of the material as we go through it. But yeah, get excited. You're halfway done. You've made it this far. You can make it the rest of the way.
Eric, did you say there was a specific MySQL extension that you had used or that is better than another in the marketplace for VS Code?
No, I just know MySQL enough, and I use the one in the workbench when I'm writing it. It just doesn't display well because, like, on Visual Studio Code, I can make the text bigger if I need to, and it's pretty readable, versus on the workbench, it's kind of always stuck at this, and the colors can sometimes not be ideal. But when I'm coding, usually I'm in here, and so the syntax highlighting doesn't bother me.
Cool, thank you.
But I'm sure any of them are fine. You can just look at how many people use it and use that as a rough guide. Go ahead.
I got two quick questions for you. I apologize if I had missed this earlier. I've been needing to copy that initial SQL database stuff into the workbench before I can start doing my JavaScript. Is there something that I'm doing wrong in the actual JavaScript file for actually creating it and referencing the SQL file?
Right, so you're never going to reference the actual SQL file in your JavaScript.
Okay.
So what you're going to do is, this is how you can set up a structure that the program uses. The program is not going to create that structure or use that structure. You're kind of, think of it like you're the construction company and you're using this to build the building that JavaScript is going to operate in. JavaScript doesn't know how the building was built. It doesn't necessarily, it's not responsible for building the building. Once this is here, JavaScript is just saying, oh, I have some expectations about what's there. I'm expecting that there's a table called auctions, and that table has an ID and an item name and other stuff like that. And the program just kind of assumes that that's there. We use the workbench almost like a construction company, where we set it up ahead of time and we keep it with the project because that's kind of the building that the project depends on having, but you're going to not necessarily directly reference it.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure I wasn't missing that. My second thing was, did you have to go through a bunch of steps to get a dark mode on your MySQL workbench?
I think it's taking that from my system settings on my Mac.
Okay. Okay.
So I think that's just what it's doing. So if you've got dark mode on there, I think it's doing that. I don't recall having to go through a bunch of preferences for that. It might be in here.
I was looking it up, and at least for the Windows one, they don't. It's if you go to at least in the Windows one, there's appearances, and it just has like high contrast, Windows 7, Windows 8, and then auto. And I Googled it, and it's like, nope, here's like this big long string to trick it into doing it. But
right. Yeah.
Never mind.
So, sorry.
No, it's cool. No, it's cool. It's a shock with everything else dark mode, and it's like, all right, over to SQL real quick.
Yeah. Just so you know, this is the one we use for the class, but there are other SQL workbenches out there that you could use as well that might be more amenable to that. This is the one I use. It works fine for me, but you might find one that works better for you. All right. Last call for questions at this point. It's 3:05. It's a Friday. I'm sure all of you are like, it's a Friday. Gonna go stand outside and not think about code for a little bit, and then step back inside and think about code some more. But any last questions?
Do you wouldn't happen to know why I'm getting warnings on boot camp about not passing because I haven't completed the optional update to my profile?
Yeah, what I would do is just, like, they're on the schedule. As long as you do those before you graduate, you're fine.
Okay.
And, like, you can still graduate with a certificate, and you just need to make sure you're doing all the career milestones to make sure you're eligible for, like, the career services and things like that. But as long as you do that, like, before you graduate, I would definitely defer to the academic exercises
Okay.
over that. But as you're starting to look for jobs, or if you start to say, like, yeah, I want to start applying at this point, you'll want to make sure you have those in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Were there any other questions? All right. Closing time then. We're going to see you all on Monday. It was wonderful having another week with you. Look forward to the next one. We will see you on Monday. I'm going to leave the meeting open just so that the TAs can finish up with any of their business. But we'll see you. I'll post the recording as soon as I get the link for it. And have a good weekend.